right now, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and imagine something. If you're driving or holding a knife or something else, a gun or something, don't close your eyes, right? Be safe. But if you can, close your eyes and we're going to imagine something. So your eyes are closed now. And I want you to imagine where we are right now in crypto. I'm going to argue that we are in a burnt out, blackened forest. All the trees are fried. Over the last year, there's been a forest fire, and the result of that forest fire is where we find ourselves now, a burnt out crypto forest. That's all sad and depressing, dismal, dismay, all of the bad adjectives, depressing. But look over there, off in the distance. After a forest fire, something miraculous happens. Little pine saplings emerge, the beginnings of a new forest. There's always regeneration and regrowth after a forest fire, and it only takes time. All we have to do is sit back and watch, and the forest will regrow itself. I think right now we are at the depths of the blackness of the forest. Not saying what price is going to do, but the forest is pretty blackened. It's pretty burned out right now. But we're already at that point where we're starting to see the beginnings of regeneration. If at this point you would accept anything at all green anywhere in the forest, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies DRep address and the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. All right. Thank you. Thank you for joining, everybody. So Daniil, who was first, I think asked the right question. When jungle? So everyone probably noticed. We've been I put our little astronaut friend in jungle settings quite often in 2026 so far, because in 2025, toward the end of 2025, he was wandering through these desert landscapes, salt flats, just the most desolate environments possible. And the expectation was we would be in the jungle in 2026. I'm going to argue tonight that we are still headed toward the jungle, a lush, verdant jungle. However, I'm afraid Kevin Warsh is not a fast growing jungle kind of guy. I think he's going to be more of a slow growing jungle kind of guy. And we're going to get to that. As it stands now, I think what was described in the intro is exactly where we are. We are in a burnt out forest, and there's like one pine sapling growing, and it's maybe going to grow slow. We don't know, but it's maybe going to grow pretty slow. We might be in it for the long haul, but we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about exactly why. Let's go. Let's go, Janil. Let's go. Streetwise, let's go. Emilio says it's time. Thank you. Thank you for joining, all of you. Brown Beardo says, scorched earth, you say. Do I even look at prices today? Let's go. I mean, prices, they've been worse recently, but we're definitely in a scorched forest. Win Lambo. I'm afraid Lambo days. The Kevin Warsh thing signals something a lot bigger. We're going to talk about it, but there was speculation that maybe Trump would just do whatever he could to juice the economy for the midterms. Now I'm a little bit afraid he's given up on the midterms. There will be no juicing the economy. I mean, Kevin Warsh almost couldn't be a bigger sign of that. Let's go. Otis Frichov, thank you for joining. Frazek, thank you for joining. Joe Davidson is here, closing his eyes. Thank you. Electric Race is here. Let's go. Let's go. A bunch of letters I can't read. Fair. Oh, because your eyes are closed. I get it. Your eyes were closed. I like it. I like it. Brown Beardo says, I'm in America. I'm always holding a gun. Okay, so Brown Beardo's eyes were not closed. Fair enough. Jose Cano, hello. Thank you for joining. At Cardano says, hey, AOS, don't give up. We're not giving up. We're not giving up. I think this just kind of changes the trajectory a little bit, but I don't think we're giving up. Rulo, hola, thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. NMX is here. Thanks for joining. Otis Frichov says, loved this intro. Thanks. Thank you. Raja Yubi says, started watching the latest shows a month ago and then episodes in reverse. Hats off to you. Amazing information, very entertaining. Thank you, Raja. Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. Brian Packard, good evening. At Cardano says, do you reckon Warsh is going out early? Warsh? I don't know. We've still, so we'll talk about Warsh. So the thing with Warsh is he's still got to go before Congress. He's going to go before Congress and they're going to grill him. And, you know, the tone of the question, the tenor of the questions is largely going to be, you know, from the opposite side of the aisle, from the White House is the opposite side of the aisle from the White House is going to be asking him, are you going to do what Trump says or are you going to do the opposite of what Trump says? Because they're going to want whatever they think is bad for Trump, of course. Intiko Raju says, big respect, love the show. Thank you for joining. I really appreciate you joining the show. Thank you. So I think the deal with Warsh is that he's got to go before the Senate, right? And they're basically going to want to know, hey, are you going to do whatever Trump says? Because the assumption of a lot of skeptical people, probably myself included, coming to this year was that he was going to name a Fed chair who was going to do whatever the hell he said, and the only thing he was going to say was juice the economy. So by juice the economy, what I mean is drop rates and quantitative easing, expand the Fed balance sheet, pump liquidity into the system, get asset prices really high, all those kind of things. This is what we're used to politicians doing. This isn't just this administration thing. This is what we're used to politicians doing, right? What do they do when they want to win big elections? They do all those things that basically, you know, are a net injection of liquidity. We have Fed net liquidity as a measure of these things. Basically, they increase that metric of Fed net liquidity because they know it's going to juice the markets and it'll make the economy look good. That is not what Warsh is known for. Warsh is known for the exact opposite of that. We're going to get to it. We're going to get to it right now. Blue Mammal says, I woke up in a burnt forest. I did too. Joe Davidson, you can open your eyes. You can open your eyes. So everybody open your eyes. If your eyes are still closed, definitely open your eyes. So let's kind of jump into a few little things that I think kind of sum up where we're at, and you know, we'll sort of set the stage. It'll sort of frame the conversation about where I think this might be going. And let me make it very clear up front. Nobody knows where we're going. Nobody knows where we're going. Nobody knows how fast that little sapling is going to grow and how fast its other little buddies are going to pop up in this burnout forest. Nobody knows. Anybody who tells you they do know is bullshitting you, or they might be the 1 out of 100 people who just happens to guess right, you know. And the number of those people will not exceed the normal statistical distribution of the people who just happen to guess right, right? So I'm not saying anybody knows what's going to happen, but we're going to talk about some things. So, okay, so we've all seen, you know, this video, and this isn't going to surprise anybody in Cardano, definitely not anybody who watches the show. Crypto Knight is here. Crypto Knight, thank you for joining. Yo, let's go. Let's go. So anybody who knows Charles's content, who watches Charles, we all know him. He says it, you know, Charles will pop up and say some brand new stuff, and you can tell he's been thinking about it for like days, if not weeks often. And he tends to have, you know, a pretty clear-headed appraisal when things are going real bad or real good, right? He'll often come through with a very clear-headed appraisal of where things really are, even if it's really bad. So I think that's the case here. He basically says, look, everybody in crypto was wrong. we all thought 2025 was going to be this magical year. Trump was so pro crypto that as soon as Trump got in, we were just going to have the most amazing year 4 of the 4-year cycle ever. You know, to whatever extent you think that's a thing, I think most of us agree it's all just tied to liquidity, and it happened to line up with liquidity because Satoshi, you know, started crypto at the same time as, you know, the GFC, basically, Chancellor on the brink, second bailout for banks, that whole thing. We all know how that goes. And it just happened to line up with this 4-year liquidity cycle, you know, and the Bitcoin halvings, sort of like it, the block rewards would get cut in half, and then the liquidity cycle would come to its, 4-year conclusion every year. And, things just kind of like lined up. So with Trump, the most pro crypto White House we have ever seen, we thought this is going to be the magical one. This is going to be the crazy one. Moon Lambos all around, pop the bottles. It's on. Let's go. Let's go. That was the beginning of 2025. And we even got this huge bump up in Cardano. We went all the way up to, what was it, 126 or whatever the hell the number was, right? I don't remember the number because none of us knew that was going to be the top. None of us knew a year ago was going to be the top in altcoins, pretty much, right? It turned out that was the fucking top. Hill Dog, what's up? Thanks for joining. Turned out that was the fucking top because we all expected 2025 to be this magical year. The Disney princess in the Alpine Meadow talking to birds and deer and, just all of the magical feel-good things were going to happen. That did not fucking happen. It was all downhill from there. And now, a year later, where we thought we would be, in like summer 2027. The drawdown normally takes about that long. We thought December, somewhere in Q4 was going to be the peak. And then, we just like slowly draw down, have another, whatever, 90% drawdown like we have in past cycles. We went from 309 in the last cycle all the way down to 2024 22, whatever the hell it was. We didn't expect we'd only get up to the 120s this time, a year early, and then draw all the way down to where we are now. Another gigantic drawdown in just 12 months time. But here we are, and Charles is right. Nobody expected this. Everybody called it wrong. We were all wrong. All of crypto was wrong. Dr. Doke, what's up? Thanks for checking in. Joe Davidson says, I need at least another 2 weeks of 30-cent ADA just for my next paycheck. Dropped 1K into ADA at 25 cents, and it wasn't enough. It's too early in the morning here. Good morning, y'all. Sasa, thank you for joining. I appreciate you joining. So this is pretty much the story of 2025. I think Charles got it right. Many in crypto entered 2025 expecting the Trump administration to be a major net positive, but reality has proven more complex than anticipated. I would just say more negative than anticipated, like the exact opposite of anticipated, right? This is what happened. And just to put this, the reason why I'm talking about Charles right now, why I think, his sort of take on this is the interesting one, is because he also followed that up. We got the recent video of him saying straight up, I've lost 3 billion. Just think about that. How often do you have, billionaires come out and say, I've lost billions? You get that from guys like Elon, who are kind of probably in the same, the same ilk as Charles, pretty open and transparent and not afraid to say the crazy stuff. He lost 3 billion. That's how bad it is, right? I thought I was having a bad year. All of us thought we were having bad years. Charles lost 3 billion, right? Do we feel bad for him? No. I mean, he's got the ranch and the Blackhawk and the jet and the Lambo, all these things. So I'm not worried about Charles here, but what I'm saying is this has been an incredible drawdown. The forest is burnt and black, guys. There's no debating it. You got billionaires telling you they lost 3 billion. This is how big it is. Jay Coco's here. No more drawdowns. I'm with you. If we could do it. Otis Fricio says build that bag. Hill Dog says current belief in ADA on CoinGecko 75%, 88% for 9. I mean, that sounds good. That sounds pretty good. I want to make 3 million, let alone billion. I think we're all 99% of people watching this are in that same boat for sure. Are we going to resurrect? I mean, what is the path forward? So we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it, Zaza. We're going to talk about it. Nobody knows for sure what's going to happen, but we're going to talk about some things that, are part of that conversation. So while Charles said that, and I've been talking about how black and burned the forest is, this is also true. Just in, Fed Governor Waller says crypto dips have happened before and big crashes are normal. Years ago, if you said Bitcoin was 10,000, you'd say, oh my God, this is crazy. This is all true, right? This is all true. I remember back in those days, like just the thought of $10,000 Bitcoin, let alone $20,000 Bitcoin, let alone $60,000, let alone $100,000. These were all crazy numbers. If you had even, if you could have convinced me back in those days in like 2013 that we would drop to 100,000 and everybody would act like, it was the apocalypse, I would have laughed at that notion because 100,000 seems so far away. My response would have been, hey, if it ever goes to 100,000, I will have already made so much money. I won't know what to do with myself. I will not care if it drops to 100. I will have sold it so long. Will have sold my Bitcoin so long before it drops to 100,000. Here I am. I have some of the same. I don't know if the Bitcoin I have now, I probably, it might be from like 2015 or something. Cause I did some trading, selling, buying in the early days. But I think the Bitcoin I've got now, I don't know if it's from 2015, 2016, somewhere right in that range. And did I sell it this time? I didn't fucking sell it. I did not fucking sell, nor did I sell my Cardano a year ago when it was at $1.20, nor did I sell it in 2021 when it was above $3, right? So it's all very relative. What would have seemed like unbelievable, truly unbelievable, unfathomable gains to me back in 2013, now in 2026 are a disappointment. So this Fed Waller commentary, it does point out how relative everything is in crypto. So meanwhile, we've got some weird stuff. And here's where we're really talking about the burnt forest, guys. Here's where we're really going to get into the burnt forest stuff and the path forward that Zaza's asking about here. So there's 2110. Thank you for joining. Hi, thanks for joining. Okay, so it feels weird right now because I think everybody has this sense we might be in one of those like, for lack of a better description, like some kind of a fourth turning kind of age, right? We're in this era where it feels like the old system is dying, and the new system is being born. It's like all of a sudden, the last dragons of the Targaryens have died and everything's changing going forward. Maybe the Targaryens are still sitting on the Iron Throne, but they don't have dragons. What does that mean? It feels like one of those times, right? And I'm not saying the US or the Targaryens. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying things are changing. Things are changing. And I actually, as much as people think that means this, the West feels like it's dying. I don't think it's actually this. I don't think it's the West is dying. I think this is actually more like something we experienced just a couple decades ago. People forget, people act like people who didn't live, who weren't alive during the Cold War, they tend to think of everything from World War II up until today as if it was just this golden age for the US and everything was very assured. During the tail end of the Cold War, when actually the Soviet Union was approaching collapse, it wasn't so clear. When I was a little kid, the Soviet Union was still around and we were all afraid as hell. We were super afraid that the Soviet economy was going to overtake the US economy and communism would spread across the entire world. We were so afraid communism is going to take over. Western Europe is going to fall to communism, right? The Iron Curtain would just expand west. First, it would hit Europe. We didn't know. It was very unclear. Kind of like now, things are very unclear. But you know what? The West did not fall. Western Europe did not fall. Communism didn't overtake the world. In fact, communism, the biggest, scariest communist power, died out, and China began this character arc where eventually it became more capitalist than the most capitalist countries, even though still run by the CCP, still communist in name, communist with Chinese characteristics, which basically means full-blown capitalism. But even as scary as things were then, the worst case didn't turn out and the West didn't die, right? I think that's where we are right now. It feels scary. It feels like, oh my God, the West might fall, all these horrible things. A lot of that is just the amplification of social media and the internet. we get all these little news bites, right? These alarmist news bites. Things are scary. The Chinese economy is growing so fast. But then you think about the actual raw data. China is in demographic collapse. Has there ever been a time in the history of human beings when demographics weren't destiny? Demographic collapse always equals decline, right? Demographic collapse always equals decline. And that's part of the argument for this the West feels like it's dying feeling because, the entire industrialized modern world is in, various stages of demographic decline, which probably leads to civilizational decline to some extent. You can make all kinds of countervailing arguments like, oh, the US is going to be fine because of immigration. I feel strongly that's true. Some countries, if they can get far enough ahead on the AI thing, that'll take care of the demographic problem as far as cognitive work. And if they get far enough along on the robotics thing, that'll take care of actual human bodies in the factories kind of thing. That's probably also true to some extent. But people get real worried when they see headlines like this. China orders banks to reduce US Treasury holdings. So this sounds real scary. And that's why, posts like this get, 750,000 views because people get real scared. Oh my God, what is going to happen? Could this be a pretty big event? Yes, it could. But what does it really mean? What does it really mean? Right? China is extremely capitalist. It's extremely capitalist at its base, even though we refer to it as a communist power. It's very capitalist. Would they be reducing those holdings if the value of those holdings was going to go up? Yeah, if they were making a mistake, but could it be they're reducing those holdings because they know we're going to devalue the dollar even further? The thing that crypto was invented to remedy. What was crypto invented for, if not to remedy this Austrian economics nightmare where we have the GFC and every central bank in the world figures out, oh, we solve any problem. We can paper over any problem by printing more fiat, right? This is what crypto was invented to remedy. So, as most fundamental levels, without thinking about, Huntington style clash of civilizations style conflict, when we see headlines like this, the first thing I think of after all those, clash of civilizations kind of thoughts go through my head, the first thing I think of is crypto fixes this because what this indicates, if you think of China as a rational economic actor, why would they sell an asset? Because they think the value of the asset's going to go down. How does the value of fiat usually go down? I mean, when it comes to large, large world reserve currencies, it usually goes down because the central bank of that world reserve currency decides to devalue that currency. That's exactly what crypto was made for. Satoshi invented crypto for this reason. He put it right in the Genesis block. So even Kalshi, right? A prediction market. Kalshi says China told banks to cut US Treasury holdings. Very funny meme. I love these. They choose the funniest decrepit out of shape old man pictures of Trump always for this, which is pretty funny. I mean, even if you like Trump, we all know the man is going to be like 80 years old this summer. I think he's going to be 80. He's an old man, right? If I'm still kicking at 80, I will accept any level of fitness. I'll be okay with any level of fitness if I'm just still alive at 80. So then we've got the dollar. We've got the dollar, and we see the dollar going this way, right? This is what we saw. Today was a lot of fear mongering over this. Everybody's like, it's the death of the West. It's all over. Looks like a bowling pin. Are you talking about the Trump photo? It kind of did. He does look exactly like a bowling pin. You're right. It does look like a bowling pin. And if you're for everybody who's a Trump supporter, I'm not making fun of Trump at all, but let's face it, that is a very unflattering picture of him. So a lot of fear mongering about this. People getting real scared. Oh God, the dollar. It looks like dollar devaluing, right? Then we see this chart. Come on. Okay. So if you look at this chart though, It is true. Chinese holdings of treasuries dropped to their lowest level since 2008, but they've been on the decline. Look at this. They've been on the decline. I can't tell if that peak in like 2011 or that one in 2014 is the highest. They've been on the decline for a long time. And this isn't even the sharpest drop. Like, look at how sharp that drop is. Look at how sharp that drop is. China has been delevering itself from the dollar for a long time. You know what I mean? And it's like, look how low. The levels were lower than this back during the GFC, right? So this isn't like a generational, thing. I mean, maybe if you're very young, you'd argue generational to you only goes back to the GFC. I was already a damn adult. I was well into adulthood when the GFC happened. So to me, it's not that long time ago. Zaza says it's a little off topic, but anyway, is Rosenbridge secure and fully operational for mainnet use? No idea. No idea. I'll let the proponents of that little ecosystem answer that question. I have no idea. Yeah. I think Brown Ritter has it right here. China has been de-dollarizing forever, right? And replacing it with gold and other things. And we all know China has played a huge role in crypto. China banning and unbanning crypto and almost, basically encouraging people to buy crypto and then telling people they can't own crypto because they realize that they can't keep that their monetary controls, keeping money from flying out of China doesn't work with crypto. You know what I mean? It's like, it's been back and forth. The story of China banning and unbanning crypto, loving crypto and hating crypto is all part of the story, right? China has been trying to park cash in various places. The US dollar, no surprise, was not, a smaller part of that story, then a very big part of that story. Now it's a smaller part of that story. This has been an ongoing thing, but this has been going on for a long time. This is not a today thing or this year thing. It's been going on for a long time. Enter Kevin Warsh. Enter Kevin Warsh. I think they realized they were never going to call us on our debts. Yeah. I think they realized that they can't. I think they realize that they can't call us on our debts, right? No one can really call the US on the debts. It's a tower of cards, and that is like the key pin that cannot be pulled out, right? So enter Kevin Warsh. Then we get a Trump. We get a Trump presidency. We get a 2025 that is a fire, just a forced fire for crypto and a lot of other assets. And then it ignites, a gold rocket and a silver rocket, all these weird things going on, right? Enter Kevin Warsh. So we all expect that Trump is going to put in there a Fed chair who's going to be the exact opposite of Jerome Powell, cut rates like crazy, QE to the moon, crypto's going to go crazy. This is what you would expect, right? When has Trump not been the guy who would do the money printing? You'd expect him to do all the money printing in the world, especially with things being so tenuous with social issues and the midterm elections coming up. You expect QE to the moon, money printing forever, that kind of thing. Jay Marie's here. Yo, thank you for joining. Hope you enjoyed the Super Bowl yesterday. Hope you enjoyed the Super Bowl. I saw your post about your buddies looked like a barbecue sauce. Looked delicious though. That looked delicious. Okay, enter Kevin Warsh. Interesting thing about Kevin Warsh, he is very pro Bitcoin. You can see in this interview, this is an interview he gave where the interviewer is basically like talking shit about crypto. The interviewer, does the whole Bitcoin, as if it's like this ridiculous video game money. Okay, it kind of is a ridiculous video game money, but he's treating it very different. It's very obvious he's of the Charlie Munger school of, Bitcoin being rat poison squared or whatever the hell Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett used to say. In fact, he even quotes Charlie Munger here. He doesn't even say the rat poison squared thing, but he just quotes Charlie Munger and everybody knows what he's talking about. And Kevin Warsh comes back on him and says, talks, for a couple minutes about how wonderful Bitcoin is and basically says that Bitcoin is a great tool for policymakers like at the Fed to gauge how they're doing, right? This is very telling. What he's saying is, hey, when Bitcoin is going crazy, that's because the Fed is probably fucking up, right? Why would Kevin Warsh say that? Kevin Warsh was the youngest governor in the history of the Fed. He was like 35 or something when he joined the Fed, shortly before the GFC, what was it, like 2005, 2006 or something. And then he was so disgusted by the money printing, the way the Fed printed its way out of the GFC. They just engaged in massive, massive money printing. He was so disgusted by it, he resigned. He resigned from the Fed. This is exactly the opposite of what we expect. We expect Trump to put in a guy who's going to run the printer so fucking hot, like everybody's burning their fingertips because they can't even, touch the printer. It's running so hot. It's running white hot. Kevin Warsh is the exact opposite of that. Kevin Warsh is the guy who fucking quit the Fed because he was disgusted by the money printing after the GFC. When you understand this, you're like, what the fuck is going on? This is the exact opposite of what we all expected. And of course, we know what happened after it became clear that Trump was picking Warsh. The markets dumped even further, as if the forest fire hadn't charred and destroyed every goddamn tree in the forest. The forest fire was like somebody, instead of dropping water or that flame retardant orange stuff out of the Forest Service planes, they dropped gasoline on the forest fire. Those planes, instead of, filling up with, water from the pools of the people in the foothills or whatever, they filled it up with gasoline and dropped that on the forest fire. So you have to ask, like, what's going on here? Because this isn't what we expected. We expected Trump to juice the economy. So what is his play here? Kevin Warsh is Mr. Anti-QE, Mr. Anti-expand the balance sheet. This is not going to be, unless, and Kevin Warsh, he's always said this. He quit the Fed over this exact thing. Over the years since then, he's never said anything different. He hasn't said like, oh, I was wrong to quit the Fed. Actually, I love QE now. No, he's kept the same position this entire time. So what's going on here? Why is Kevin Warsh in there? So Trump and the White House administration, and Scott Bessent is in on this. Scott Bessent probably had quite a bit of influence on what kind of Fed chair would be picked. And actually, Kevin Warsh has already said, he's already talking about how there's going to be greater cooperation. If he's Fed chair, there's going to be greater cooperation between the Fed and the Treasury. And I shouldn't say greater cooperation. What I should say is they're going to work differently together. The way they're going to work together is going to be different than it was in the past. So what is going on? Is there a bigger plan? So before we move on, I thought this was important to remind everybody, 15 years ago today, Bitcoin hit $1 for the first time. That's just 15 years ago. Bitcoin hit $1 for the first time. That's how crazy us being at these levels in Bitcoin is. But let's jump in to this alternate theory of what might happen. So, on this channel, we've talked a lot about this thing that happened in Japan. And it's sort of this cautionary tale about juicing the economy. I've done whole episodes on this in the past about how if you're an economy like Japan and you're sort of industrializing over the course of decades and decades, sort of post, we can call it reindustrializing, post World War II, and you've got a central bank, and that central bank can give money to commercial banks, and it can do so out of what we can call a directed window. The directed window is, hey, commercial banks, we're the central bank. We're going to give you loans if you will promise to take that money and invest it in certain sectors, right? It's like, hey, we want the country to be big in steel. We want to produce a lot of steel. So we're going to give you money at good interest rates if you'll promise to lend that out to borrowers who are going to, use it to grow our steel production. So you can do that. You can do that for a certain number of decades, and you can juice the economy. Just like we thought Trump was going to do this year, you can do that and juice your own economy. So that happened in Japan. That happened in Japan for many, many decades. And the Japanese economy flourished, did awesome. One of the greatest stories of economic success of any country anywhere, to the point at some point in the 80s or 90s, famously, I've said this many times on this channel, everybody kind of knows the story. There was an area of several blocks in Tokyo that was worth more than all of Los Angeles, all of California. Sorry. It was a certain number of blocks in Tokyo that was worth more than the entire state of California, right? That's how red hot the economy was running. The United States, there were no electronics produced anywhere that could compete with Japanese electronics. The United States, Japanese automobiles doing excellently, the entire economy just running super red hot. So that sets the stage for what's being described here. And this is going to relate to this sort of narrative. And I'm not saying this is true or not true. I'm just saying it's something to think about in the context of 2026. So I'm going to read this post. China is closing the gap on the US fast, and the US has two big problems: debt and China becoming number one. And I know we're just talking about Japan. We're comparing the two, right? Yes, if the US doesn't do anything, China could become the greatest country in the world. He puts that in quotes. Don't believe me? Here's how. He talks about, China doing well in a lot of different things. And we've talked before on this channel about how the Chinese central bank has been running the Chinese economy, we'll say the CCP through the Chinese central bank, in a lot of the same ways that Japan juiced its economy for all those years leading up to the 80s and the 90s. So if you think this doesn't matter, you don't understand hegemony. China became the factory of the world. The US has one option to save themselves, and it's to devalue its currency. Remember, we were talking about this. The dollar is going this way. China is cutting its US Treasury holdings. Why would China be cutting its Treasury holdings? It's for exactly this reason. It's afraid that the US might exercise the option to devalue its currency. Let's take a look at what happened 40 years ago. 1985, Plaza Accord. US plus Japan plus Germany plus France plus UK met in New York City and coordinated dollar selling to weaken the US dollar, right? So the US dollar weakens, exactly what it looks like China is afraid of right now. Why? Because Japan's exports were eating America alive. You could argue Chinese exports doing something similar to America today. What happened over the next 3 years? The yen experienced plus 116. Japanese products got way more expensive overseas. Japan panicked. The Bank of Japan did what central banks always do. They cut rates to save growth. So in 1990, they were at 6%. So BOJ rates, 6%. In 5 years, they were only at 0.5%, 0.5%. In another 5 years, they were at 0.1%. By 2016, they had the infamous, famous negative rates that we all know about. So what does this produce? So you get decades of near zero rates. This is how lost decades are manufactured. Then the bubble crash cycle. So what we were just talking about was the crash, or in this period when the Nikkei index goes clear up to these stratospheric numbers, and then it crashes down 82%. So what does all this produce? He describes it as the real monster shows up, the carry trade. Because rates are so low, they cut rates so far to save growth. You produce this environment where the carry trade works. Traders can go to Japan and borrow at negative or 0%, take that money, carry that money basically over to the US, symbolically, and buy higher yield US assets. So borrow at basically no interest and buy high yield US assets. What does that produce? That produces trillions flowing in one direction. It doesn't flow, capital chases yield. And the carry trade produces this flow, not in the direction of Japan, but in the direction of the US. So then he tries to describe what he thinks is the Plaza Accord 2.0 mechanic, right? The US dollar is devalued. It's basically what those charts are showing. The yuan goes up. So Chinese fiat currency goes up. China exports weaken. The Bank of China, People's Bank of China, cuts rates, right? Just like Japan did. The carry trade shifts to cheap yuan, and you get what Japan experienced, where the Nikkei did not recover back to those levels until, what was it, last year? From like 1990 to like last year, the year before, the Nikkei index did not recover. This is what he's predicting for China. Will this happen? I don't know, but it's something to think about. He says right now, $1 equals 7 yuan. If USD weakens 50%, $1 equals 3.5 yuan. That's a yuan that effectively doubles, and export models don't survive that. The export shock, China exports 3.5 trillion. If they take a 50% hit, as he was just describing, export linked jobs are approximately 220 million. If exports have, that means 110 million jobs at risk. That's societal pressure. And you can imagine all the things. So basically saying, is China in 2026 in the same position as Japan in 1985? So is that true? And how is this all impacted? I think somebody in the comments even pointed out that there's also the question of whether China's population is actually like a fifth to a half of what they say it is, right? There's also the demographic collapse danger that China's facing. So let's see. Dolphy Wolf says, good morning. Good morning, Dolphy Wolf. Thank you for joining. Zaza says, it seems that Bitcoin currently has significant support within the U.S. administration. In your opinion, does BTC play a pivotal role in the U.S.'s race with China for economic dominance? Anybody offer Mandarin courses for ADA? There you go. Another like smack for the algorithm. Been enjoying the show in the background. Oh, thank you for joining, Dina. You appreciate it. So, yeah, we'll see. I mean, that's anybody's guess what role BTC will play in the next moves made by the administration, right? I think what comes next, I think we haven't really seen the current administration's hand yet. We haven't really seen whatever they're planning, because it doesn't make any sense, right? That Trump would appoint Kevin Warsh. To me, one of two things is true. Either he's got something planned that doesn't involve quantitative easing, which is pretty shocking, or a completely incompetent decision has been made, or like Trump got tricked. Somebody tricked him into hiring Kevin Warsh. But, I mean, the White House isn't like, a White House administration has many, many parties, right? And the second they make any decision, like all the commentators come out of the woodwork, they had to have known. They, would have been very obvious to everybody that Kevin Warsh is not the quantitative easing guy. It's like impossible to imagine that the people who made that decision didn't realize that Kevin Warsh is not a quantitative easing guy. So the plan to me must be something else. It must be something else, right? And if you think that something else is this, if that plan is this, if they think this is really another one of these like fourth turning times, I know 4 generations doesn't match up with 1985 to 2026, but if we think of it as just one of these times, these pivotal times when everything changes drastically, right? When all of a sudden Japan goes from 6% to negative interest rates, right? From 6% to effectively 0 in 5-10 years. If this is one of those times, what do you do if you're a US administration, right? You could juice your own economy, or you could do what worked in 1985, right? 1985, the US is worried about being economically overtaken by Japan. What does it do? It doesn't juice the economy. It doesn't juice the economy, right? It devalues the currency to cause this huge problem for the big exporter that's dominating trade. Maybe that's what's going on. Maybe that's what this Kevin Warsh trade. Maybe this is a long play. We're not used to describing the current administration in terms of long plays, but maybe this is this long play. Maybe they're making this very, very responsible, rational decision. Like, hey, the story of the U.S. economy and all the world economies, basically since the GFC, has been just printing money and juicing the economy. Maybe they've turned over this new Austrian economics leaf all of a sudden. Maybe the wisdom of Austrian economics has sort of, shown halfway. I'll say halfway because I think Austrian economics would say don't manipulate the currency. But, to the extent that they maybe are not planning to print money, maybe that half of Austrian economics has sort of, the light of that half of Austrian economics has shown on the current administration. And they're like, hey, let's not do this. Let's do this super responsible thing. But then also, let's do this other thing that they maybe are hoping does the same thing to China that the devaluing of the US dollar did to Japan in the 80s. So, not saying this is what's going to happen or this is what's going to play out, but a lot of people have been talking about this for quite a few years during basically the entire ascendancy of China when we realized the Chinese economy was running so hot and you had, the building of the ghost cities and the ghost towers and all this ridiculous investment in real estate that would never be lived in, all of this exuberance. People immediately started drawing parallels to Japan, and everybody knew what the U.S. did in response to that, to that sort of that same kind of industrial overbuilding in Japan. So something to think about. What is Frichov says? Okay, so Crypto Gypsy says stack, stake, and chill when the ship turns this last 12 months. When the ship turns, this last 12 months will be forgotten. ADA all the way. Okay. What is Frichov says? This is my plan as well. Intiko Raju says, yes, we've been here before. Wouldn't a low rate environment cause China to borrow for free and invest in high yield assets elsewhere then? So I think the problem for China is, so if you've been following, I haven't really, because it's so far beyond the scope of this channel, I haven't really followed all the craziness that's going on internally in China right now. I haven't sort of covered, I've been following it, but haven't covered, Xi Jinping seizing the PLA general and his letter to everybody else in the military, if I get arrested, and all the craziness that's going on right now. But it seems like there's always this specter. There's this this phantom there's this fear that's always sort of in the back of everybody's mind when they're thinking about the sort of, China as a cohesive whole. And that's that if you get this level of jobs at risk, if you have 100 million people in China that suddenly don't have jobs, can you have a government in China that keeps control of the country, right? The story of China historically has been one of, expansion and contraction, and all of those people staying under the control of one government. Very big questions about the extent to which that is possible if this many people suddenly don't have jobs, right? Economic success is, under this narrative, is kind of painted as a precondition of the government retaining control. So it's like, if this many people are unemployed, I don't know if chasing yield is something that can happen, because the government might not be something that can happen. Okay, this scenario, the rapid adoption of BTC, is surely connected to preserving the US and global elites' buying power. It's a capital protection play for when the money printer goes burr again. Yeah, I mean, it's like pretty much all risk assets are better to be in than fiat if the money printer goes burr, right? It's like the stock market does great. Gold is already doing crazy historic things right now, right? Like gold is already showing exactly what you're talking about. Why crypto has been so left behind by that is another story, but we've got some assets, some store of value type asset. In the case of gold, a store of value type asset that's already doing exactly what you're describing. Pistons Pressure says Evergreen Bank is probably already insolvent, only a matter of time until the money machine stops printing. We'll see. We'll see what happens. I will be the last to say I can predict what happens, but it definitely feels like we're at one of those crazy times when it feels like something big is about to happen. And the fact that Trump picked Warsh makes me think even more so that we're at one of these crazy times when something unexpected, right? One of those feels like one of those black swan on the horizon kind of times. So we'll see what actually happens, but it feels like something weird. Maybe black swan is too strong a thing to say, but it feels like we're at one of those weird times when everybody's surprised, right? So jumping into some Cardano news, I wanted to cover that. I think that's the most important thing going on, but let's just talk about a little Cardano news. So you remember I did a lot of content on this channel about the new constitution, and I'm not going to rehash all that. Everybody who was here got a very significant dose of that, so I won't rehash it. But there were big problems with the way the current constitution was produced and the disclosure around how it was produced from my perspective. And the result was also problematic with respect to the role for the CC, right? The role for the CC was kind of the way what we got out of the new constitution was a little bit problematic. And we're starting to see that just this week. This week, some of those things are starting to rear their ugly heads. So here we see a post from the Eastern Cardinal Council. Eastern Cardinal Council statement to the Cardinal community. A new Cardinal constitution has been enacted on chain. Let's see, they say our vote on the governance action addressed how the Constitution was produced, not what has been enacted. With the new Constitution now in force, we will take the time needed to carefully review and understand its implications before considering further governance actions. During this period, we will not vote on constitutional matters on behalf of the community. This pause is intentional and responsible and ensures that any future decisions are made with clarity, accuracy, and respect for the Constitution as it now stands. So we see one of the seats on the Constitutional Committee now not voting until they can take out the time and figure out what the new Constitution actually says. This is exactly the kind of ambiguity that I knew was going to be created by the deletion of all the text in the Constitution. So much text was hacked away from the Constitution in such a haphazard manner, like the deletion of some key terminology, like terminology about separation of powers and all those kinds of things. So much was hacked away. I knew we were going to get into all this ambiguity. And now we see a member of the Constitutional Committee not wanting to vote until they can figure out what the hell's going on. And there's a lot more controversy, right? Recently we had a net change limit vote, and now there's controversy about whether or not it even passed because some members of the Constitutional Committee decided not to vote. So here's a post. So the NCL didn't pass because too many Constitutional Committee members didn't bother to vote on the governance action. If there was a reason the governance action wasn't constitutional, so be it, but not vote at all. And there was a request for explanation. And one of the non-voting CC members said, as per the Constitution, only budget info actions can be declared unconstitutional by the CC. The CC has zero authority on all other info governance actions. So indeed, nobody fucked up. And then there's controversy about whether or not they should have voted and a lot of discussion. I'm not going to get into all of the detail of this, but I just wanted to point out, and this doesn't even relate to the new changes. It just relates to the role of the Constitutional Committee. There's already a lot of controversy about the role of the Constitutional Committee. And unfortunately, and I mean, this is even under the old version of the Constitution, but unfortunately, under the new Constitution, so much text was hacked out of the Constitution. I think we all need to buckle up for a lot more of this. People can't even agree. People can't even agree about whether or not this governance action passed because certain seats on the Constitutional Committee didn't vote. So here we have more discussion, about whether or not, this was whether or not the fact that this would have on-chain effects means that it was an on-chain implementation under the language of the Constitution. A lot of technicalities, a lot of technical discussion of the Constitution. This is all just to point out that what we've got going on here is, we're already seeing controversy about the role of the Constitutional Committee. Here we see a post. This is really tricky because many have interpreted the Constitution as requiring a vote on the NCL by CC members, but some CC members say it doesn't apply. If the CC is the arbiter of the Constitution, who can make the final decision if it is passed? So even different members of the CC are in disagreement as to whether or not this required a vote. A lot of controversy already. And unfortunately, the new Constitution just cuts out more of the text. So here we see an article from this account, Agora Cardano. And, the account is basically like, a gap in the text does not reduce responsibility. It increases it, and sort of tries to make a case that, where the text does not address, certain things, there's like sort of social responsibility for, coming forward and voting. Let's see, the removal of mandatory CC voting on certain treasury adjacent info actions under Cardano blockchain ecosystem Constitution 2.4 may have been a design mistake. That's exactly what I argued. It was a design mistake. Using that removal as justification for silence, that's not voting by CC members. That's a poor precedent. Bundling constitutional changes reduces community oversight and increases blind spots. That's something I argued about that amendment. Government based on this is probably fine is not mature governance. If the Cardano ecosystem wants long-term stability and credibility, constitutional changes must be treated with greater rigor, narrower scope, and clearer accountability. Silence in the face of ambiguity is not neutrality. It is a decision in and of itself. So, a lot of this is what I argued in the article I wrote, where I said the new Constitution is worse. And we're kind of already seeing so much controversy, not necessarily directly related to the changes in the new Constitution, but I think the fact that we're already seeing so much controversy about this means that under the new Constitution, we're all going to have to buckle up, because there's going to be a lot of things that this new Constitution doesn't address. I think it was a mistake to pass that new Constitution. I think it's the way it was created was bad. The result is bad. It's just a bad turn of events. And we're already sort of seeing the same problems we're seeing now. We're going to see a lot more of those under this new Constitution. So periods of constitutional transition call for more diligence, not less. So you can go ahead and read this article. I won't go over the whole thing, but interesting article, and definitely a lot of the same issues I highlighted in the article I wrote right after it passed. So another interesting thing. So this is something I think we all know, but I love it when something we've discussed in Cardano forever starts to sort of become more discussed in the greater Cardano ecosystem. So this is something we've talked about with respect to one of our biggest competitors for a long time. So scaling matters, but how you scale matters just as much. Sol significantly boosted throughput, but its block data size is also growing at an insane pace. Sol adds around 80 terabytes every year. That pushes infrastructure costs higher, and those costs eventually get passed on to users. In the industry, it's well known that running Solana validators and even RPC services requires extremely expensive hardware, which is why many providers avoid it. This isn't sustainable, and I believe it will become a major issue over time. So a lot of people are sort of whipping Ethereum with the Sol example, right? Ethereum has been outpaced by Solana, but all along, Cardano has been looking at the hardware cost to run a node in Solana and saying, this is actually not sustainable. This is very similar to what we've been talking about with the examples of the Japanese economy from the end of World War II to the 80s and 90s, and what the Chinese economy has done, basically since the 90s. It's like you can juice things really hard in an unsustainable way for a certain amount of time, and then the other foot falls. And for Solana, the other foot falling is going to be that the fucking ledger is so big, you'll just get more and more centralization. Why? Because it's too unaffordable to run a node. To be a validator is too unaffordable. You're narrowing down, you're necking down the number of parties who who are able or willing to be validators. So you're going to get fewer and fewer validators, can become more and more centralized. This is a narrative that the Cardano ecosystem has been discussing with respect to Solana for a long time. And now I think that other foot is finally falling. Otis Fricio says, fiat mines in the AM. Catch y'all next time. Thanks for joining. Appreciate you joining. We should just revert the Constitution back to what it was before and do the changeover again in smaller chunks. Exactly. Probably impossible because the 4 biggest DReps are 3. You've got the DRep who proposed that constitution. I don't think is going to vote for that. Yoroi Emergo, probably not going to vote for that. So probably impossible for us to do at this point, sadly. James Syracuse, thank you for joining. So kind of interesting. Here's another big change. This is not crypto related, but it's so interesting. I had to include it. For those unaware, SpaceX has already shifted focus to building a self-growing city on the moon. The Mars days are over, guys. Even Elon Musk, Mr. I want to die on Mars. I want to make sure I make it to Mars. Let's go to Mars. The flame of human intelligence cannot be snuffed out. We need to expand and become a multiplanetary civilization. So that's now changed. Now we just need to become a multi-object, planetary object civilization, because the moon is not a planet. It's just a satellite of Earth. So it's like multi-object civilization, basically. So as we can potentially achieve that, a city on the moon, in less than 10 years, whereas Mars would take 20 plus years, the mission of SpaceX remains the same: extend consciousness and life as we know it to the stars. It is only possible to travel to Mars when the planets align every 26 months. So 6-month trip time, and you can only do it every 26 months. Whereas we can launch the moon every 10 days and have a 2-day trip time. This means we can iterate much faster to complete a moon city than a Mars city. That said, SpaceX will also strive to build a Mars city and begin doing so in about 5 to 7 years. But the overriding priority is securing the future of civilization, and the moon is faster. I actually love this. Mars always seemed too ambitious, right? It seemed too ambitious, and the moon's right there. The moon is comparatively right there, right? So it's like just like the Constitution. Like, we don't need to use AI to overhaul the entire Constitution all at once and shove that down the throats of the DReps and do it all at once. Like, just take it piece by piece. Like, first colonize the damn moon. Let's put a city on the moon, and then you can work on Mars after that, right? Let's hit the low-hanging fruit first. Let's bite this thing off, piece by piece. Don't need to swallow the entire goddamn solar system. Let's just go to the moon. So I think this is a good move. We didn't get a moon in the market, so Elon is making sure he gets the moon another way. I like that. On your prior topic, so this means Sol might make room for ADA to move one spot up the ladder. I don't know about that. Solana, the meme coin degens, I'm afraid Solana will forever be their home because it was so much, it was so much. It was like the Strip in Vegas if it only had one casino that was open for business for like 4 years. You know what I mean? It's like, even if that casino is super decrepit at the end of the 4 years, it's like the dudes who are going in and out of that casino for 4 years, that'll always be their home. So I don't know about ADA taking Solana's spot, that quickly, but they've got problems over there. To run a Solana validator now requires a petabyte size server and 9 months or more of download time to get, oh my God, 9 months of download time to get to a full node. That is fucking crazy. Okay. Do not use this. Hey, I'm about Mars. Why not? But definitely let us first settle a bit in a couple places before it. Moon sounds okay as a start. I'm with you. Plus, then we don't have to talk about the goddamn moon landing hoax anymore. If Elon can set up a city on the moon, then we won't have to talk about the moon landing hoax anymore. I'm sure there will still be like moon deniers, even when Elon like takes a selfie on the moon or whatever, but let's just do that first. Let's do that first. Okay, so this is also very interesting. In other non-crypto news, you're probably aware there was a commercial for the Ring camera that was basically like, hey, check this out. What we can do is if you lose your pet, we can turn on all the Ring cameras in the neighborhood and use those to find your pet. And they're like, don't worry, you can, don't worry, you can opt out of it. Everybody freaked out, of course, and was like, what? We've all got cameras on our front porch, and Ring can use like AI to search for things using all of our Ring cameras basically without us having any involvement in it. This is the Panopticon. This is the photographic Panopticon, the surveillance state. It's being sold to us as let's find your lost dogs. But obviously, in a dystopian future, this could also be used to track humans. And we've all paid for the hardware to put these things on our front porches. The surveillance state, the Panopticon has tricked us into not only allowing them to install the surveillance system, but we've actually paid for the surveillance system out of our own pockets. So this is pretty hilarious. Obviously, Ring is probably rethinking this whole thing. You're getting, people posting things like this. Can the police access Ring camera footage? Police can access Ring camera footage under certain legal conditions. They can obtain footage through a search warrant or subpoena if they have a valid legal request. If the footage is stored locally, police can request it directly from the owner. In emergencies, police may also obtain footage without a warrant under the exigent circumstances exception. Ring does not share footage unless compelled. So, it's kind of like your data at the centralized exchange, right? They can get it if they want to. So everybody's freaking out. You could feel however you want about that. Definitely some people are going to be like, I don't care. I don't care. I'm not worried about it. Other people are going to be loading their own ammo upon having seen that commercial. So I thought it was kind of interesting though to see the reaction. So, and it is like almost the most realistic version of the Panopticon. It's like the closest we've ever gotten to like a real life Panopticon. Ring cameras. Who would have guessed? Okay, Kiro says it's hard to believe that Japan would want to lie for America with the JAXA project. What is the JAXA project? I don't even know what that is. What is the JAXA project? Brown Beardo, woohoo, 9 months. They're basically giving birth to a Solana node. Yeah, that's right. The 9 months is a joke, but unless you have gigabit plus internet speeds, that estimate can't be that far off. I would be curious to know. I mean, do they have any like checkpointing like we have in Cardano? Do they have any systems to they must have something to speed up the download because it's so absurdly large. It's like they must have something, but okay, moving on to IR news. We're like creeping closer and closer. Just like I think the crypto forest will regrow from the forest fire slowly. We're not going to find ourselves in the super high liquidity sort of jungle that I hoped our little astronaut friend would find himself in. I think it's going to be more like the forest regrowing after a forest fire kind of thing. Just like that, we're slowly creeping toward some kind of conclusion in the Persian Gulf as well. Okay, Kuros is specifying they sent a satellite around the moon to prove whether or not we actually landed on the moon, and they got footage of the landing site. Oh yeah. I actually saw the photos. The photos made the rounds on X very recently. I saw those photos. I hope that helps some of the moon landing hoaxers. I'm sure there are moon landing hoaxers listening to this video. I'm not condemning any of your positions. I'm just saying Kuros is right. I believe I saw photos this week. Joe Davidson says IR news sounds like Infinity Rising news. 2 weeks ago, things were looking hot. Impending war, not so bad now. Yeah, things are looking less like impending war. But that's only when you look at headlines like this. So obviously, we talked last week. They were meeting in Oman. It was Witkoff and Kushner. They met in Oman. The Tehrani delegation showed up like an hour and a half or 2.5 hours late. No surprise there. I'm sure they thought they were pulling one over on Kushner and Witkoff. Like, look at how we've made fools of them. They had to wait for us to show up, even though they had to travel halfway around the world. And we're basically just traveling to our neighbor. So funny, Tehran. Good job. But actually, that probably just pissed off the Trump administration. And I don't think that's a good idea right now. This post says the Trump administration has told Iran that it expects the Iranian delegation led by Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi to arrive at their meeting next week with meaningful substance and concessions after Tehran ruled out a total halt to its uranium enrichment during Friday's talks in Oman. Two people familiar with the matter told the Jerusalem Post. Yeah, people speculated over the weekend. They were like, okay, this was the two parties negotiating the negotiation, and the negotiation, if it happens at all, will obviously happen like the next week. So that's what this kind of looks like. But a lot of people were speculating even before that meeting that this was both sides just stalling. The clerical regime stalling for time to prepare for kinetic strikes against them, and the U.S. stalling for time to get more air defense batteries to protect all of its bases throughout the entire region. So that's what a lot of people are continuing to speculate this week. And of course, as part of this visit to Oman, Witkoff and Kushner also visited the USS Abraham Lincoln and the rest of the carrier strike group. So there's a lot of photos of Kushner and company, inside the USS Abraham Lincoln. This is not totally normal for a diplomatic, a diplomatic corps, visit to also include a visit over to the carrier strike group. But this is sort of how hand in hand these things are happening right now. Normally, the State Department and the DoD, now Department of War, are two different things, right? Those are two different things. But here you see the diplomatic guys, it's like one day they're over being diplomats, talking peace in Oman. The next day, they're on the aircraft carrier. That's how hand in hand these things are happening right now. So we've also seen things like this. Satellite imagery taken today displays the deployment of the USS South Dakota, a nuclear-powered Virginia-class submarine at Diego Garcia. I did a video a little while ago about the importance of Diego Garcia. Diego Garcia, basically its own sort of island, super carrier. Diego Garcia is basically a super carrier made out of dirt, floating in the middle of the ocean in the perfect spot for the U.S. And now we've got a Virginia-class nuclear-powered submarine. Think about that. This is an attack submarine that can launch missiles, and it's got a nuclear generator on it. It doesn't need to get fuel. It's nuclear powered. It can go wherever, and it's full of missiles. This is like the scariest thing. And it's underwater. It's stealthy. It's more advanced than, pretty much anything else underwater. This is a scary predator. This is like Megalodon running around in an ocean full of black tips, right? This is a different kind of predator underwater than anything, any of our adversaries can field. Okay, let's see. Brown Beardo says, my brother was like that about the moon landing. I don't know if he saw these because I didn't either. Don't think any amount of evidence will be enough. He's quite entrenched. Yeah, and I'm not the kind of guy who wants to debate the moon landing hoaxer guys. Cause there's some legit weird stuff, right? And there's some weird videos. Like, you watch some old videos from like the 1950s. There's some videos from the 1950s that were broadcast as like, hey, here's a video of our astronauts in space. And you watch it and you're like, that is not what space looks like, right? There's some very sketchy stuff. Obviously, Joe Rogan is balls deep in all this. He's gone over like every inch of this territory, including, sort of the start of his frenemy relationship with Neil deGrasse Tyson, over the years. It all started with Neil deGrasse Tyson crushing Rogan's moon hoaxer stuff. And then Rogan didn't talk about moon hoax stuff for like several years. And then, he like had more details that aren't quite explained by the Neil deGrasse Tyson position. So I'm not trying to get into debate with any moon hoaxer guys. I'm not the guy who's going to debate you guys, but the posts about those photos did happen. Let's see. Antico Raju says, I remember Charles talking about Ringmakers of Saturn. That book was crazy. Check it out. Oh, I've heard of this book. I haven't read it, but I've had somebody explain this book to me before. I've watched a video or something about this book. So I haven't read it, but I do know about this, and it is crazy. This is crazy. Okay, more IR. Last week, I explained why I thought we re-entered. This is me talking. I'm reading a post. This poster says, I thought we re-entered the peace talks with Iran. He's explaining why he thought we re-entered the peace talks with Iran. We were stalling. Stalling for what? Enough aerial defense assets to protect U.S. forces in the Middle East. It is now abundantly clear the USA is not just looking to slap Iran on the wrist. We are setting up to dismantle the regime. Israel is now prepared to act unilaterally with a lower threshold than that of the U.S. Things are shaping up to be one of the largest shock and awe campaigns in modern history. This operation will reshape the Middle East as we know it today. One of two outcomes will happen, either peace in the Middle East or a power vacuum worse than when we ripped out Saddam Hussein. So I haven't dwelled on this point very much, but I think about this pretty much every day since the possibility of kinetic activity reared its head. If this goes down wrong, we could have the same kind of horrible situation as we had in Iraq with Shia militias in the south, Sunni militias in the center, Kurdish militias in the north, and then these other sub-state actors like ISIS popping up. Similar thing could happen if we screw this up, right? If this gets screwed up, I shouldn't even say we, but if this gets screwed up by whoever, we could end up with the same kind of thing where the nation state is destabilized. So, I mean, the thing is, what they want to do is destabilize the regime and have a clean transfer of power, by all accounts, to Reza Pahlavi, right? The crown prince. You want the crown prince to come in. You want the governmental apparatus to stay intact, the governmental machinery to stay intact, minus the clerics and the IRGC, right? You don't want the guys who killed tens of thousands of protesters to remain in power, but you don't want things to break down into anarchy, because then you end up with an Iraq where you just have militias and, millions of people die. Obviously, that's possible here. Anytime you talk about regime change on this level, especially such an ancient civilization, right? Like this, it's like large country, right? With many ethnic groups, many linguistic groups, multiple religions, groups from multiple religions. It's like it could go the wrong way. If they don't carry this out correctly, this could go completely the wrong direction and you end up with another Iraq. It's very possible. I hope for the people of Iran that's not what happens here, but it's possible. Here's another post. So this is kind of interesting. So you probably saw this news over the weekend. The second family, JD and Usha Vance, arriving in Yerevan. So they went to Armenia with their kids. I believe the video shows them and their kids arriving in Yerevan. That's how you kind of knew that things weren't going to pop off this weekend, right? Is JD Vance going to be one border over from Iran with his kids and his wife if kinetic activity is going to pop off this weekend? Probably not. Would he go there so that his kids could see the oldest Christian country in the world before kinetic activity pops off? Possibly, because he, probably a student of history, thinking to himself, this is my last chance to see this country before things are really wild right next door. I also want my kids to see it. So there you go. But I would assume, I would guess he will be out of there, pretty shortly. Probably will not be there next weekend. This also happened. So this goes a lot toward why the US is still so interested in the Persian Gulf, and the the Gulf of Oman and the Indian Ocean and this entire region. So here we see something that we've talked about a lot in the context of the world breaking down into trading blocks and Chinese versus US naval power. So a lot of different people on the internet have commented about the fact that while China is building naval assets very quickly, it still has this short range navy. It doesn't have a blue water navy, right? The US does. The US has the biggest blue water navy by far. China isn't even in second place, not even in third place. The UK and Japan both have bigger blue water navies. China is way down the list. So the US can do stuff like this, right? If there is a Russian shadow fleet oil tanker taking crude oil from Venezuela to China, the US can just take that shit in the middle of the Indian Ocean. China can't do anything about it. Russia can't do anything about it. Venezuela can't do anything about it. That's the value of having a blue water navy. If, say, China were to invade Taiwan, right, is the greatest weapon of the US to go, fighter jet versus fighter jet, destroyer versus other small ship, uh, in and around, Taiwanese waters? No. Possibly the biggest weapon in the US would be to cut off the flow of oil, something like 70% of which has to go from the Persian Gulf, through the Indian Ocean, through the Malacca Strait, over to China. And China knows this, right? And this was an exercise of the US's power. The US took this freighter full of oil, headed to China, and there's not a goddamn thing China can do about it. This is the real, when we talk about like actual military power, this might be the most potent threat the US can make to China, cutting off the flow of oil. So here's another post about that. At first, it seems so crazy. At first, people were sort of claiming that this was unconfirmed, it wasn't real, and then multiple reports came in. So this is one of the things when people talk about, the number of soldiers that the People's Liberation Army in China is supposed to have versus the size of the US Army. The importance of all that is there's a little less luster on just the number of guys in your army if you have to import the vast majority of your oil through this one shipping lane and you don't have a blue water navy, and the competing adversary power has the biggest blue water navy the world has ever seen, right? This is really the big threat for China. The US cutting off all of its oil, because if the US cuts off the oil, everything stops. So this post says the U.S. Department of Defense announced this morning that forces under the United States Indo-Pacific Command, Indo-PACOM, carried out a right of visit, maritime interdiction, and boarding on the Panamanian-flagged crude oil tanker MT Aquila 2 in the Indian Ocean overnight without incident after tracking the vessel, which was operating in defiance of President Trump's established quarantine of sanctioned vessels linked to Venezuela from the Caribbean Sea. So this is like a pretty serious exercise of power by the Trump administration. That's not really like, it's not just a tanker. It's not just 700,000 barrels of oil. This is like a reminder of what happens if there ever is full-on military efforts between the US and China. So I think that is about all the news to start out the week. I hope everybody enjoyed the Super Bowl over the weekend. I hope if you are not in any part of the world where the Super Bowl is watched, or you don't give a damn about American football, I hope you also had a great weekend. Hopefully, we're looking forward to a good rest of the week. I hope what we see this week is not kinetic activity in the Persian Gulf kicking off that leads to, dystopian civil war for the people of Iran. Hopefully good things will happen in Cardano and in crypto in general. Maybe we'll even get some hints as to where the Trump administration is going with his Kevin Warsh appointment. But we're in a weird time, I think, both in terms of international relations, in terms of global macroeconomics. Elon Musk is talking about putting a city on the moon. This is one of those weird times in sort of world history, I think, where a lot of things change. So hopefully it all goes good for all of us. But I hope everybody has a good week. At Cardano, thanks for joining. Kwong19, anything new with ADA? Yep, watch these videos. We'll talk about all the new things with ADA. James Syracuse, Knight, thanks for joining. Bar5625, thanks for joining. Intico Raju says Nicolas Maduro equals negotiated exit. Sanctioned oil. Sure felt that way, didn't it? Sanctioned oil transport equals justification for U.S. naval activity in critical areas plus naval dominance. Yeah. I mean, all those things. I agree with all that. But I hope everybody had a great weekend. I hope you're looking forward to a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.